When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comics YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be continuing our reread for the actual story. The last chapter we did, I believe, was Dany 5 in Viserys' death. So coming off of a pretty big chapter, and we're coming into, I think, one of the best chapters of the entire story. A lot of people like to put the next Ned chapter as one of their favorites of this book, because it's kind of the conclusion of really Ned's whole arc, in my opinion. But this is the one where so much of the groundwork is laid. There's a lot of many twists. There's a big death in this book, or there's a big death in this chapter. Ned is confronted with a lot of his feelings, a lot of his morality. Things that have been built up the entire book are laid the foundation in this chapter. We see a lot of the foreshadowing for the story, whether that's Jon's parentage, whether that's other facets of the story going forward, and things that are really going to be a big part of it. This is a very important chapter, so excited to do this one. I really enjoy doing my notes for this one, even though this was a longer chapter. This is about 13 to 14 pages long. One of the longer actual chapters for this book, but it's just so well written. But we open page 501 with Ned dreaming of the Winterfell crypts. And this is a great foreshadowing for a lot of reasons, but namely the one is because Ned is going to be dead soon, and so he is going to be going down to these crypts regardless. So that's an interesting point right away. But also when we look at the past and Ned's guilt, regret, or mourning over his family, you know, he goes specifically and stops at Brandon and Lyanna's, burial spots. That has a lot of weight to Ned's character, given how Lyanna had a very tragic death for Ned, whether that's, giving birth to Jon, whether that's for some other theory that you believe. Regardless, Lyanna's death is going to hit Ned really hard because the two were very close, and the meaning of her death, how that could have caused Robert's rebellion, as well as some of the lies that Ned has had to tell up to now. But he'd walked this 1,000 times. But he finally reaches Brandon and Lyanna, and again, a garland of pale blue roses, weeping blood. And Ned again remembers he promised her something. We're not sure what. But again, like I've always talked about, those blue roses are actually very significant to Lyanna and the parentage of who her child is. But again, a lot of potential foreshadowing to the theory of R+L in this very opening paragraph, which is all really good. But we also note in this section with the crypts that the Stone King's eyes followed him as he walked through, giving more foreshadowing that death is following him and catching up. But other things is it's like the trapped souls theory of these kings is a really good theory, because you think about these eyes, they all seem almost living. Anytime anyone goes down the crypts, it's very similar to the way Ned describes it here, where it's very eerie. It feels like you're being watched. But other parts of this is when anyone that's on Stark goes down there, they feel like an outsider. They feel like they're not welcome. So all of that is really apparent in this opening page. But Ned is then awoken from a knock on the door as the king's steward and other men, and some of his and others, instruct him that Robert requests his presence immediately. Ned notes that the time has finally come and that Robert has returned from the hunt. So again, I want you guys to remember there's a lot going on for Ned here, because Ned realizes he's going to have to tell Robert this really awful information, right? Like, he has to tell his friend, his brother, basically, that his kids aren't his. He's been being played for a fool for a very long time. The death and carnage that's going to come from that, all of that is great, because Ned is really struggling on how to come to the words. But then you're also going to have the twist that everything is going wrong for Ned in this situation. But that gets us into page 502. So Ned takes a moment to dress, thinking on what he will say, and begins his journey. It is still night, and he notes the quiet and emptiness of the castle. Again, this is great because it builds the atmosphere as to what is to come, of the coming storm that is Ned's next chapter. And all of that's really awesome, because succession is going to be the crisis. It always is in a lot of George's stories, and even in real history. And this is a great way of just building that atmosphere. Tolkien is one of the best writers when it comes to putting you in the shoes of his characters. And George was very simple things like that, just telling how the castle is very quiet and peaceful. You really feel the way Ned is feeling right now. It's almost a reflection of him as a character, where he feels very empty and hollow, having to tell Robert all this information. Again, he doesn't even know that Robert is on his deathbed yet. No one's told him that yet. So again, it's really the feeling of, the storm, Robert being a Baratheon, and his end. But we also note the gold cloaks on the wall of Maegor's holdfast. A nice little wink to showing how Ned's already thinking that he may need to use this force, right? Later on in the chapter, we're going to see that Ned tries to get Littlefinger to bribe them. So it's very, important that George kind of shows the golden cloaks are a notable force that Ned may need to use. Ned notes what Maegor's holdfast looks like for its moat and its high walls, and notices that there are 3 Kingsguard in attendance, a very bad omen. But this is reinforced as he notices Barristan's face as pale as milk. Something is wrong. And yeah, Ned notices it right away. This is very odd that there be this many Kingsguard on duty at the same time, especially this close in attendance. Also seeing Barristan, just knowing something's wrong, right? And so that all is going to come to a head here. The steward announces Ned's entrance, and he instantly notes Pycelle at Robert's side as he is laying in bed with Cersei sitting on it as well, following Ned as he approaches, with Renly also pacing nervously around. You get a very vivid picture of what's going on and the different pieces playing. Again, Pycelle is probably being instructed to let Robert die, but to make it look like he's at least trying. Cersei, in her mind, this is the best case scenario, but she's also thinking, what is Ned going to do here? If Ned reveals right now to Robert that her children are no good, how would that work, right? There's an interesting dynamic going on with Cersei because she's in the thick of the game, and her plan, I guess at this point, is going pretty well. She got extremely lucky with her plan, but so far, the coin is now flipped. And this is something that Ned doesn't really notice yet. It's more when Ned kind of leaves that he really figures out his position, that his position is not on stable ground right now. But he notes that Robert is still in his hunting apparel, given that his boots are still in use, given the mud, the grass, all those things, and his green clothing has been slashed open. But this gets us into page 503. Ned instantly can tell how dire the situation is. Robert is pale. He smells of blood and death. Blood is also stained everywhere. He confirms this by looking at the injury. He then begins to ask what happened, but Renly interjects saying it was a boar. And again, a lot of things have to be going through Ned's mind right now. He was just about to do this reveal to Robert, and he's also thinking, should I still do that? He's also thinking, oh my God, is my brother, one of his best friends, someone very close to him, regardless of their arguments, is going to die, more than likely. It's that realization that, again, Ned is watching everyone that he cares about around him die. And so he probably hasn't even thought about, the after effects of what is to come next after, if Robert was to die. So a lot going through Ned right now. But Robert notes that it was a monstrous boar and he missed his thrust because of the wine. Brings up an interesting question that Ned and Varys will discuss later. Which is also interesting, I want to note out, because there is a theory that Bloodraven was actually the one that either warged the boar or sent the boar to kill Robert. Again, if we go off of the way this prophecy is that George introduced it in the show, that a Targaryen needs to be on the throne, maybe this was Bloodraven's way of getting the Baratheons off the throne, causing this war to happen so that a Targaryen can eventually take the throne, whether that's young Griff, or that's Dany, or that's someone like Jon, maybe given what Bloodraven knows. So a lot of that could be very apparent. Also, we know that Robert Baratheon would have no problems killing another Targaryen if Jon was to be revealed. So all of the motivations for why Bloodraven would want to do it makes sense. We know Bloodraven has the capabilities to warg something like a boar and do this. So there's some interesting information there, but let me know what you guys think. But again, there's also multiple things going on, right? You have the idea that Cersei was also trying to get him super drunk so that something like this might have been able to happen. So you have a lot of things going on there that could have led to Robert's death. But Ned asks where his guard was. And I always found this a silly question. It's like, I know Ned is in a point where he's not thinking straight given all the problems going on and the conflicting issues, but he knows Robert too well. He knows Robert does his own killing. It's not anything near what it is like in, say, House of the Dragon with Viserys, where it's already basically there. He's not even really hunting. It's more like he stabbed something that can't even barely fight back. So that's not really Robert's way. But either way, Renly tells him that Robert commanded them to stay back. But Ned notes how bad the boar got him, ripped him open completely. Pycelle has tried to bandage him up, but it wasn't enough. The blood was already soaking through. And again, Pycelle really can't do anything here, in my opinion. Like, the injury's too bad. He's probably already gone. But even if it was something a bit more minor, Pycelle would probably try and allow it to fester or maybe get some sort of illness so that Robert would die regardless, because that's what Cersei needs right now. Cersei's whole win condition right now revolves around Robert being dead. Robert does note, though, that he killed the boar regardless. Again, shows Robert's strength, kind of the person that he was. But Renly agrees, and that they brought it back for what Robert says is for the feast after his death. But at this, Robert tells them to leave. Cersei tries to protest. Again, Cersei knows what this is, right? Cersei doesn't really want any situation in which Ned and Robert are alone, because who knows what they're going to talk about. Whether that's her children, whether that's the regency of the realm, a lot there that's very important that Cersei would want to have some say in so that she could either defend herself or try to say, no, Ned shouldn't get this. But at this, the party all leave, but Pycelle, who tries to offer Robert milk of the poppy. Again, Pycelle is also trying something else where it's just try to get Robert to go to sleep so then he dies, so he doesn't get the chance to tell any of this information to Robert, or Ned to tell any of this information to Robert, or Robert to give Ned any, like, things like the regency, for instance. But Robert denies this, slapping away the milk, and tells Pycelle to leave. And that gets us into page 504. So, moving on, Ned then asks Robert why, as he starts to become overburdened with the fact of losing his friend and the pain of his leg, and asks why he must be so headstrong. That's another facet of this, is like we're trying to think about all the things Ned's dealing with internally. He's also not in a good physical condition either. His leg is killing him. He needs help dressing. He needs help walking. It's a very dire situation for Ned right now, given his condition, and he doesn't really seem to grasp that, really, until the end of the chapter. Robert, in his usual tone, says he killed it at least, and says he should do the same to Ned as he disrupted the peace and asked for the mountain's head. Again, it's a great reflection of Robert's reign in general. Robert is someone that likes war and likes conflict, but at the same time, he doesn't want to upset people. He's kind of similar to Viserys on the show of House of the Dragon, where he doesn't want to cause one tipping balance to go into war or the other for some, reason, even though Ned is correct in the way of getting justice for the mountain. He then turns his attention to Dany and says the boar was sent by the gods as it was wrong. Again, this is a great conclusion to Robert's, whole journey on the Targaryen killings. And something I want to note, George is fantastic when it comes to writing characters as humans. And I think this is normal, is on your deathbed, you think about some of the decisions you did, you reflect on things you did in the past, and you may learn from those. And because, one way or another, one reason could be whether you believe in an afterlife or not, you could be wanting to atone for those mistakes, trying to get into a better afterlife. For instance, I'm Christian, for instance, so hell and heavens, you want to atone for those things that you may have done in the past that were wrong or whatnot to try and get into God's good graces, or whatever. And so that's a great writing tool that George uses here with the character of Robert. But he also says that Ned was the only one that would tell him the truth. The others were fools. And this is one of the things that, not only because Ned and Robert have a good relationship for the most part, they do have their squabbles, but Ned is someone that Robert can trust. And that's the whole idea of why Ned is going to get the regency from Robert. And that's kind of that silver lining there. But he asks for paper and ink and to write what he says. He announces his will and that Ned is to be the Lord Protector of the realm until Joffrey comes of age. But again, we see Ned do a little bit of manipulation as he changes it to my heir, knowing that Joffrey is not Robert's heir. So all of that's interesting because when we go back to this line that Ned tells Arya, that sometimes you can lie, more or less. This is one of those reasons where it's like Ned does not want to tell Robert on his deathbed that his legacy is fractured. How is he supposed to do that? Right? Like, how are you supposed to tell your friend, your closest ally right now, that your legacy is a lie? Right? You don't have any children outside of your bastard children that are going to come after you. Your throne's going to pass to your brother. And in reality, you were a failure of a king. Like, how is Ned supposed to tell him that? He just can't. But also, Ned notes a very important line that has ripples throughout the entire series. He thinks the lies we tell for love. And again, I really point to this idea of Jon's parentage, whether this is Ashara, whether this is Lyanna. Regardless, Ned is told some lies about that. And that's very important that we can apply to Jon's mother/father. But that gets us into page 505. Something else I do want to note before we get into page 505. I mean, just think about the lies we tell for love. Who does that sound like? It sounds like Jaime, right? The things we do for love. A different wording, but so similar. And so when you have Ned, who views Jaime as this anti-character to him, he's like, at this point, he is basically viewed as the complete opposite of Ned. To have a line in which the two both have that are so similar, it shows you the way George writes. Jaime is this character that we know by book 3 is going to be vastly different than the way we view him now. And so I love the way George has these simple lines that you really don't even think about, you know, until you do a reread. And you're like, wow, that's a really important line that maybe people don't remember that much. But page 505 begins with Robert telling him to fill in whatever he must, and he will sign it and present it to the council upon his death. And at this point, I think Ned starts to realize his position is on shaky ground, because not only does he want his friend and brother to die, but Robert was Ned's shield. As long as he was alive, nothing really bad could happen to Ned. Like, he was never going to be killed, for instance. But now the game has shifted, right? And right now it's like Ned has a sword, but no shield. He can make a strike, but he also can't block a strike. That's kind of how I view this. We're on a little bit more equal ground now. Cersei has the maneuverability to be able to make a big move on Ned. And that's the key point here. And that's what I think Ned starts to kind of realize here, but I don't think he realizes how bad the situation is. Robert then notes that he is as bad as Aerys, which I disagree with. I don't think he's as bad as Aerys. I think Robert is still a bottom king of Westeros, but he's not on the level of Aerys. Aerys was someone much more crueler than Robert. He was the person that brought down the entire Targaryen dynasty when it should have been easily securable. So not that bad, but a bad king in a lot of different ways, whether you look at bankrupting the realm, whether you look at the succession crisis after him, just a lot of not good things for the most part. But Ned reassures him that not that bad, which Robert is pleased with. But he says that at least he did this one thing right, which is unfortunate for Robert because it's not the truth whatsoever. This move, especially looking at how Robert doesn't know about Joffrey and all these things, is actually going to lead to a full-scale civil war that will kill thousands of people, that will lead to all these supposedly kids that he thinks of probably dying by the end of the story. Robert will not be remembered for that. Robert will be remembered that being one of his worst moves. And yeah, it's unfortunate because Robert is a very tragic character. He's someone that does a lot of these bad things to himself, but in the end, you can't help but feel bad for him. But Robert then has two last things for Ned: to stop the killing of Dany if possible, and to help Joffrey be a better man than he was. These are very noble requests from Robert, because Robert knows Joffrey's just not fit to be king right now. He knows he's not a good person. Look at this stuff on the Trident. Robert knows all of that. And also, he wants to stop the killing of an innocent kid, basically. Dany's only, I believe, 13 or 14 at this time. So all of that's very noble from Robert, even though he kind of allowed those things to be set in motion regardless. Robert then notes the pain, and Ned calls everyone back in, but he notes how Cersei has gone. I think this is important, right? Ned kind of should be realizing here, Cersei is trying to maneuver, right? She's trying to take this time that she's now been given. She realizes the situation. Let's start making some plans. And again, this is the point where I think Ned starts to not understand what's going on. I have defended Ned throughout the entire story on his decision making, why I don't think this is a bad decision, or maybe why I understand the decision. But the problem here is Ned, I don't think, understands the power dynamic. He notes that hopefully Cersei and her children are on a ship and leaving. But I don't think he gets it, right? Robert is dead. The reveal of Cersei's children being bastards or whatever, it doesn't ring as hard, because who has the power now? Who has the power to execute, killing Cersei and her kids? Ned, I guess, believes right now, given that he is the regent, has that power, but the power is who has more men, who has more money, who all of those things. Ned's not thinking about it from a political sense when he should be. But that gets us into page 506. He then has Pycelle and Renly watch as he fixes the seal of his will and asks to be given milk of the poppy so that he may die. And asks Ned if there will be dreaming. Again, I love this because this is so natural. On your deathbed, this is when you think about the most about what comes after death. I think all of us can, at least one point of our lives, think about that. What comes after death? Is it just nothing? Is it some religion and their version of afterlife? What comes after? And Robert's even thinking about this here. Even when Robert is the bravest man in a lot of ways, when it comes to battle, when it comes to dying, he's uncertain of the unknown, of what is to come. But he says he hopes so that there will be dreaming, and he will give Lyanna his regards. Robert also says to take care of his children. And this is interesting because Ned once again kind of lies, but not really. Ned pauses, knowing he couldn't lie to Robert, so he thinks of the bastards he has met and says he will guard them with his life and like they are his own. Which we know will not come to be because Ned will die, but it's an interesting sentiment. Like, how will the royal bastards be treated after the main story ends, right? So, the people we've met, Edric Storm, right? Maya Stone, how are these characters going to be treated? How will their lives kind of turn out? After this, though, Robert falls into a sleep. The last we will see of King Robert. Very, it's really important. I think it's interesting that we see Viserys and Robert die in back-to-back chapters. I think that's very important. It's interesting to the story. It's a nice reflection of where the story is moving forward. Pycelle says he has done all that he can do, but he shall die soon. It had taken 2 days before they had got to him, but by then it had been too late. Ned asks how long he has left, and Pycelle says he should already be dead, which is a wonder to him. And Renly pipes in saying he was always strong. And this is just a great reflection of Ned, a great reflection of Robert. He's clinging on to life longer than anyone should be. And it's also a nice little parallel to you think about the Mountain later on in the story, where the Mountain survives this poisoning longer than probably most men would be able to. But Ned also in this moment notes how Renly was the very shadow of Robert, as they looked the exact same. Maybe Robert was a bit more muscly, but Renly still looks the part. And this is all interesting because given the way Renly is going to try and take the throne later in the story, people like Ned realizing he looks exactly like Robert is one of those reasons why Renly gets that, because people loved Robert. And so when you see Renly as this character very similar to Robert in appearance, they're instantly going to back him over a character like Stannis, who doesn't look like Robert. He's not a character that acts like Robert in any regard. All of that's interesting to understanding Renly's motivations coming on later in the story. But at this, Ned exits and tells Barristan Pycelle has given him... Ned exits and tells Barristan that Pycelle has given him the milk and for him not to be disturbed unless by Ned's leave. This gets us into page 507. Barristan confirms this, but says he's now failed his oath twice, as Aerys and now Robert have died during his command of the Kingsguard. And again, I think if you look at both situations, Barristan is way too difficult, or way too hard on himself. 1, Robert killed himself. 2, Barristan was injured at the Trident, fighting for his king. It's not his fault that Aerys died. So, again, Ned denies this, saying Robert killed himself, and if he saw that Robert killed himself and he had seen Robert hunt boar thousands of times, no one could predict that this was the time he would fail. But Ned even confirms this more by saying that Robert confirmed this himself. And what's very interesting is the way Varys enters this scene. He kind of creeps up, asking, but who gave him the wine that made him so drunk? Barristan notes that he drank from his own wineskin, but notes there were many wineskins that were given to him, given that he kept getting alcohol because his squires always kept him refreshed. But Varys takes a little bit, Varys goes a bit deeper with this, asking which one of his squires, to which Barristan notes it was Lancel, again throwing more suspicion on the Lannisters, more shade there, and Ned continuing to grow further apart from them. But Varys again continues to poke the bears, saying he hopes the lad does not blame himself, and notes his connections with House Lannister, which is all very odd, given it's like Ned obviously knows this, and Varys is just spelling it out even further to show and to paint the Lannisters as the murderers or the real culprits behind Robert's death. But that gets us into page 508. But also something that's very relevant to understand is like, yes, Lancel may have been the one that was actually giving Robert all of this wine, but you have to think that Tyrek Lannister, the Lannister that goes missing in book 2, and someone I've theorized as being part of puppet theory with Varys, he knows all this information. That's very relevant to the story moving forward if Tyrek Lannister is alive and well. Ned then tells Varys that Robert wants the plans to kill Dany unmade, but Varys says it is too late, but he will do what he can. Again, a nice little wink to some of the foreshadowing of Dany's plot in the next coming chapters. But at this, Ned continues out of Maegor's holdfast when he's interrupted by Renly. He asks a word and for the men to back away for privacy. And this is the big moment, right? When everyone talks about Ned and his failures, this is the one, right? Everyone kind of points to this idea of we should have just gone with Renly's plan. It was the thing that made the most sense. It was really the only thing that might have been able to save Ned here. And let's talk about it. So Renly notes that the letters about the Regency, again, it shows how Renly is very smart. He's capable. He understands what was going on politically, and how Ned has been made the Lord Protector. Again, what else should this tell us, right? It should also tell us that Cersei's going to know this information as well. She is intelligent in that regard as well. She's not the most smart character or anything, but she's going to know that, right? She's going to know what Renly knows here in this situation. But Renly, building upon this, says that he can give Ned 100 swords in an hour in support of Ned. But Ned asks what he would do with those swords. Now, what I find very interesting is the show decided to go with that Renly should be king, and that's the thing he tells Ned, and that's really what makes Ned even more dissuaded. In the book, that's never the case. Renly never says that he will become king and he'll take the throne. He is just planning on getting the Lannisters out of power at this point. Now, we know Renly, his goal would have been to take the throne, but he doesn't tell Ned that. That, I think, is something that's very smart that Renly does. Renly understands who Ned is, and even though Ned won't want to do this dirty work, it's Renly's last kind of throw in the dark before he kind of retreats and goes into open war, really. But Renly says, let's strike. Whoever holds the king holds the kingdom, which is true in so many ways. Again, think about the events of the Dance of the Dragons and how important the throne is and how the legitimacy works, whether that's through the Blackfire rebellions and the Sword of Blackfire, whether that's, you know, Maegor versus like Aenys' children. All of that's interesting to understand, and really Renly gets that perfectly. And I even want to think about something in the main story, right? Think about how Joffrey is viewed for the general public to Stannis. Stannis is not on the throne, so Stannis looks like more of the usurper trying to take the throne. But Renly says they should take the children in hand and Cersei will not oppose them. And in this way that they would have control over Cersei and also the realm. And I want to talk about this for a second, right? So Renly has a good plan, in my opinion. They have complete leverage over the situation if they were to do this, but Joffrey would be Joffrey. Would he go along with this, right? Like, how would that whole situation add up? And the thing, I guess, would be if you're Renly is, well, if Joffrey doesn't go along with it, we imprison him and, you know, I take the throne, more or less. But Ned is appalled by this. He will not spill blood on Robert's deathbed or have frightened children brought out of their beds. Again, this fits Ned's character so perfectly, because think about what has been one of the driving factors for Ned so far. Innocent children. That was the thing that really divided Ned and Robert. And when you think about the way the situation Ned is painting it sounds very similar to the situation that happened with Rhaegar's children, with Elia. And so all of that's really interesting. And so when we think about it, this makes complete sense. Right? It makes complete sense for Ned to not want to do this because it goes against all of his morality. It goes against everything that he's seen in the past when it comes to, you know, taking children in the night and all of these, you know, just things or unhonorable things. And so we understand as a viewer why Ned should do this. Given everything, all the pieces right now, this is the one where Ned could win. If Ned does this, he wins. He doesn't. Because his honor gets in the way. His morality gets in the way. Again, the biggest theme of this chapter, in my opinion, is how being a good character, a good person, a person that tries to do right, is so difficult because you're tested constantly. And a lot of the time, because you have those, morality, or you have honor, you have all these other things that they hold you back from doing the decision that might lead to the better result. And this is all apparent here. And Littlefinger is going to say exactly what I just said at the very end of the chapter, but it's the reason that I love George R.R. Martin's writing is because Ned is very much in character here. And when people call Ned dumb, I don't think that. I think Ned realizes that Renly does have a point, but Ned can't do it because of who he is as a person, who he's been brought up to be, everything that shaped him into the man that he is now. He can't do that. That's not him. And so I just definitely stray away from Ned being an idiot. I think he makes bad decisions here and there, and this is one that I think was a bad decision, but given who he is, I understand the decision making for him. So moving into page 509, I do want to point this out because I thought it was a little interesting, given that this is in the shadow of Maegor's Holdfast because Ned and Renly have just left it. It's interesting to think about a man like Maegor, someone that was willing to do actions that he believed were for the greater good, I guess, for him personally. So, for instance, the faith or religion, it was better for the Targaryens to have them, not bearing arms, right, because of who the Targaryens are. And he, because of that, had to do a lot of actions that were not morally great. And it's interesting because Ned is struggling with kind of the same thing that Maegor does, except for Maegor is willing to do those harsher, those crueler routes, whereas someone like Ned is not willing to do because they conflict with his morality. So Renly then says that every second they waste gives Cersei time to prepare. By the time Robert is dead, it may be too late for them both. Again, Renly understands the situation much clearer than Ned does. And that's not to say that Ned doesn't understand that maybe Cersei's planning something. He doesn't realize how dire the situation is. But Ned denies this, saying Robert may live, which is, again, very hopeful thinking, right? In this moment, I think it's Ned is denying the truth of things, right? When you see someone that you care about or you love and they are on their deathbed or you're going through some sort of emotional turmoil, usually the first thing a lot of people do is deny it. They can't accept the truth of the situation. And so that's something that maybe Ned is dealing with as well, or an escape route out of this thing that he deems as being very not honorable. So all of that could be playing into how Ned responds to Renly in this moment. Also, there's just a bit of shock as well about everything kind of falling apart for Ned when it comes to what his plans actually were. But Ned then returns to his chambers, but we get some time of reflection, right? Where we talk about where Ned has been kind of in shock. He's not really thinking clearly. Ned even wonders if he makes the right decision when it comes to Renly, because now he's had some time to think on it, sit on the decision he made, and now he's questioning it. But he remembers Cersei's famous line about you win or you die, because now Ned's kind of starting to put this into, I think Ned is starting to realize a little bit that Cersei's not going to give up. Cersei's not going to leave. That's not who she is. And now that you really think about Robert's dying, I think Ned, after reflecting on it, thinks a bit more about it and actually realizes that he's probably not made the best decision possible. But also what I think is interesting is it leads into Ned's next decision, because in this doubt, he calls on Littlefinger. Again, Ned's not exactly stupid. He does realize in the situation that Renly has some wisdom, that he needs some swords. He needs something just in case things go awry, which I find is great. George again makes Ned a very human character in the fact that Ned is doubting his own decisions, which leads him to make another decision that can be very fatal, even if it is really his last kind of hope. But he tells one of his men to find him before day breaks and asks of the ship his daughters are to be escorted on. He wants 20 men to be aboard and makes a request that they stop at Dragonstone to deliver a personal letter to Stannis himself, and notes that they may be wary of visitors for obvious reasons, so he tells them to display the direwolf sigil and the Starks, meaning that they're coming, because, again, Stannis knows everything that's going on right now, in terms of not like Robert's death and all that, but that Myrcella, Tom, and Joffrey, they're all not Robert's. So he's kind of been in a planning phase where it seems like he's garnering swords and things of that to his nature, things to him and stuff of that nature. That gets us into page 510. So moving into page 510, his men take their leave, but Ned can only think of his grief for Robert's death and for what is to come. Again, I talked about this a lot. I've tried to hammer it in there. Ned is someone that's going through a lot right now. And he's kind of having this moment where everything's settling down. The adrenaline has worn off. And now he's sitting here thinking about everything that's going on and what is going to come after Robert's death. But he especially notes Robert's letter and how words can mean the difference between life and death. Again, it's another mistake in my opinion. Ned is kind of playing this as in everyone will play by the same rules, that honor will apply to others. If Robert left this in his will, people will obey it no matter what it says. And that's not really the truth. The truth is, if Ned has the power to reinforce what Robert said, then it can go his way. But in this situation, he's lost all of his power, noting again the men he sent with Beric Dondarrion, noting the men he's trying to send on this ship. He is someone that just does not have the power that someone like Cersei does in this moment. But at this point, Ned begins writing his letter to Stannis, informing him of Robert's death and the current situation. He urges Stannis to come to King's Landing at once to claim his seat. Again, I do believe that Ned is taking a lot away from Renly's wisdom or some of the words that he tells Stannis. Renly's big point was, we need to secure the throne. We need to secure who is ever going to be the heir. Whether that's Joffrey, whether that's Stannis. And in this case, Ned understands that. We need to get the rightful heir on the throne as quickly as possible to give him all the legitimacy. So again, I think Ned understands that as well. His plan is not necessarily bad. The problem is he doesn't understand his own power level and the way he's going to be able to shape events. But this also goes into the fact that Ned, from a war point of view, knows the Lannisters won't go meekly. Like, if Cersei and her kids are either killed or imprisoned, Tywin and Jaime are going to start basically going on a full-on assault. He is going to need all the support he can get with Stannis and all of that. But there's also an interesting point here, is that Ned notes that once Stannis comes, he will make his own hand, and Ned will be free to go home and see his family. But I don't think Ned really understands what's being set in motion. If all of this goes as Ned plans it will, Ned's not going to get to go home to live out in peace. He's going to have to bring all of the northern armies south, just like how Robb does for Ned. And so everything is not going to go that way, right? I think Ned is thinking about this, is almost in a dream state where he thinks he can go back to his normal life, and that's not the case. Yes, if they win the war against Tywin and Jaime, that will be the case as well. But that leads us into page 511. As he is sealing the letter, his men come in with Littlefinger. Littlefinger congratulates him for being named Lord Protector, and Ned wonders how he knows this, but he says Varys has told him, and Ned's look at the letter confirms it. Again, doesn't take a genius. You know, Ned and Robert are left together. They're great friends. Robert went all the way up north to get him to be Hand. Joffrey's not old enough, so if Robert was to die, there's got to be a contingency plan on what will happen until Joffrey becomes king. It's not exactly the hardest thing to put together, so I don't know. I guess that it does make sense that Ned's a little bit surprised, but at the same time, it's not like a big shock in my opinion. But Ned is angered to learn this and says Varys has some magic he does not understand and does not trust him, to which Littlefinger says, good, you are learning, which is not really fair to Ned because Ned has never trusted Varys. He's really just stating this to state it, but it is a point of it. Like, Ned, to a degree, is learning, but at the same time, it's funny because Littlefinger notes this, but this is actually going to be Ned's downfall because of he's trusting Littlefinger, but he's not, because he's putting at least some faith in Littlefinger, even though a lot of people think, why does Ned trust Littlefinger? And in a lot of reasons, Ned doesn't trust Littlefinger. Ned is really, his only hope right now is Littlefinger. If Littlefinger gives him the gold cloaks, he wins. If he doesn't, he doesn't. Littlefinger controls the entire game right now based upon his control over the gold cloaks. Ned says that he called him here in the middle of the night because he learned the truth of Jon Arryn's murder, which isn't really the case, but that he knows that Jaime and Cersei had kids, not Robert. And when Robert dies, the throne passes to Stannis. Littlefinger then goes against this, saying, unless, to which Ned says there is no unless. Again, in Ned's mind, this is set in stone. There's no other thing that's going to happen. Stannis needs to come next, but that's not who Littlefinger is. Littlefinger is looking for self-gain, what works in the benefit of him. But Littlefinger refutes this, saying Stannis can only take the throne with his help, and if he was wise, he would make sure Joffrey took the throne. And Ned, Ned just hates this response. It's not an honorable response. It goes against all of the laws of Westeros. and he asks Littlefinger if if he has a shred of honor, to which Littlefinger does respond, a shred. But that gets us into page 512. Littlefinger says to hear him out. Stannis is no friend to him or Ned. Upon his ascent, he will make a new hand and a new council. Yes, he will thank him, but no more than that. Stannis taking the throne will mean war. Cersei's head will be on a spike, and Tywin will go to war. Will go to war accompanied by some of the old allies of the Greyjoys and the Targaryens. Notably, Littlefinger says, the Tyrells. We learn that Stannis is hard and unforgiving, which could prompt others to dissent. And Littlefinger's not wrong on part of this, right? Like, this idea that there could be others that would side with Tywin because of his influence and things like that, but the Tyrells, I don't think, are one in this situation. I think the Tyrells would much more just sit this out until one side was winning over the other. Like, if Tywin started beating Stannis, then they would come in. But I don't see that happening, given that the Tyrells are very close to the Baratheons. Given that I think the Tyrells are smart enough to understand Stannis' only heir is Shireen, so Renly, logically, based off the laws of Westeros, would come next in the line of succession. They would just keep doing that. The Tyrells would just keep using Renly. So they have more to gain. I think in that regard, it's less risky. Now, again, I still think the Tyrells sit out. I don't think they give full support to any side at the beginning of the war. And Littlefinger tries to play on the idea that, again, Stannis, Tyrells don't have a good relationship. Mace Tyrell siege storms end during Robert's Rebellion. So there's a lot of kind of bad blood that will, we kind of talk about a little bit more in Clash. But I don't think that we would see the Tyrells just straight up go to the Lannisters when you really think about it. The Dornish would be definitely on Stannis' side. The North would be on Stannis' side. The Vale is an interesting one. Like, would Littlefinger try and keep the Vale out of it? Maybe. I mean, just to keep their army fresh, that's possible. The Riverlands are already at war with the Lannisters, more or less. So it doesn't look good for the Lannisters. I don't really think it makes sense for the Tyrells to actually do that. But I do get, like, what Littlefinger's trying to say here. But Littlefinger says, on the flip side, Joffrey is only 12. Ned is Hand and Lord Protector. Again, he'd be the most powerful person in the kingdoms. He can rule for 4 years in Joffrey's stead. And Littlefinger notes he only needs to take the power. Marry Arya to Tommen and Myrcella to Robb. Make peace with the Lannisters and bide his time. If Joffrey does not like Ned in 4 years, they can dispose of him and put Renly on the throne as well. Again, it's not a bad plan, all right? From Littlefinger's point of view, it's not a terrible plan. The problem is, Littlefinger, this is all, in my opinion, a show, right? It's a show. Because Littlefinger knows that Ned is not going to accept this. He knows Ned way too well. Ned is not going to be corrupted by, like, saying, oh yeah, you can have more power, or you can have this or that. Ned wants his family back. He wants to go back up north. And so all of this is actually counterproductive to Ned, right? Because in this scenario, Ned is the person that's going to be ruling for the next 4 years. That's not what Ned wants. So none of this really benefits Ned on the things he wants. It all benefits someone like Littlefinger, because Littlefinger is going to ask for a price for doing all these things. And so it all benefits Littlefinger. But at the same time, I think if you think about the common person, right? Is this better for the common people? If Ned sets aside his differences with the Lannisters, which is impossible given even the evidence he has against them and the evidence that he thinks he has, even though the Lannisters didn't do it. For instance, Lysa being involved in Jon Arryn's murder, all that stuff. Like, there's just no way this is going to happen given who Ned is as a character. But for the common people, this actually isn't a bad idea. I don't think it would really work because I don't think Cersei would really consent to it, because Cersei's the one you kind of have to consent with. If you're going to consent to anyone, it'd be with someone like Tywin, maybe. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're too far gone, right? I think the two sides are too far away to do some sort of compromise like what Littlefinger is saying. The only way this would work is if they did something like what Renly suggested. They take Cersei in the middle of the night and the kids. And again, Ned's just not going to do that. And again, I also just think this is Littlefinger playing with Ned, seeing how far Ned will get his hands dirty. Like, think about the end of this chapter, right? The end of this chapter is more about Ned having to bend, right? He has to do some sort of bad moral choice in his mind. And what he ends up doing is going for a bribe for the Gold Cloaks because he needs their swords. But it's really just Littlefinger playing on that, extending it out, making Ned feel uncomfortable. But Ned notes that this is treason, and Littlefinger notes his price would be modest, and it would be treason if they lost. Again, referencing Littlefinger's line, Cersei's line. They will die. If they fail this, they would die. But it's the Game of Thrones. Again, referencing back to the good line. But Ned can't forget this. His pride, his honor won't allow it. Ned says that Littlefinger forgets about Jory and Jon Arryn. The people have died, and then shows the dagger, to which Ned notes the difference between true and false. Which is interesting, given that two of the things Ned just pointed out, Littlefinger was involved in, which is interesting. It's not the Lannisters, right? I find it very interesting because when you think about Jon Arryn, Littlefinger directly was involved in that. And when you think about Jory, Littlefinger was at that event and kind of stood by. So it's interesting the way that works, because Ned is a character that doesn't fundamentally understand like a morally gray character, in my opinion. Like he doesn't understand someone like Jaime, for instance, where Jaime is a character that does some good things and does some not great things. But that leads us into page 513. Ned notes how they sent a man to cut Bran's throat, and Littlefinger again plays with Ned, noting he forgot he was talking to a Stark, and then notes it will be Stannis and war. Ned notes that he is the heir. Again, Ned is not willing to bend on the heir stuff. He's not willing to bend on things that are fundamental to his core beliefs. But Littlefinger then asks what he requires, and Ned says he will forget this treason that was mentioned, but for the love of Catelyn and his promise to help him, he says that he needs the gold cloaks. The Lannister guard will overrun his own forces, so he needs more men. But Littlefinger then poses the question: when the Queen and the Hand announce two different kings, who will they follow? And at this, Littlefinger spins the dagger until it points to him, saying, the one who pays them. Now, this is great, because think about this from what Ned's been thinking about this whole time, that everyone's going to play fair. But again, when you have this power dynamic between the Queen and the Hand, who are they going to follow? The person that is standing to gain them more, the person they maybe like more, the person that has more power, the person that has more fear, the person that's loved. There's a lot of factors that go into which side you're going to choose. And in this scenario, the Queen has more friends at court. The Queen has more of an influence than Ned does at this time. The Queen, for one, has Littlefinger backing her, more or less, because Littlefinger sees more to gain. And so all that's interesting to think about, and I don't think Ned really thinks about that aspect of it. But even now, Littlefinger notes how Ned wears his honor like armor that will protect him, but all it does is weigh him down and make it hard for you to move. And it's interesting when you think about what Tyrion says to Jon at the beginning of the book, thinking about what people call you and your personality traits, wearing them like armor. It's very similar to the way Ned uses his armor as almost a shield, but it doesn't really seem to actually work in this world. One of the reasons we love George's writing. But that gets us into page 514. Littlefinger notes how even now Ned knows what he called him here for, but the words stick in his throat. Again, this is fantastic writing, because Ned is being brought down to the level of King's Landing. Even this good, moral person that we kind of see as Ned, even he has to do some dishonorable actions at some point, and it just tests all those morals. It's so good. And really the big part I like about this is, what do you do when it's the difference between life and death when it comes to the question of your morals, what you stand for, what you believe in? That's what I find so fascinating, and a question that Ned is going to have to struggle with for the next couple chapters. But Littlefinger's right. Ned's words were in fact caught in his throat, his neck tingling with anger, but Littlefinger laughs, saying he should make him say it. But he won't, for his love of Catelyn, and says he will bribe them with 6,000 gold pieces, a third for the commander, the officers, and the men. And at this, he picks up the dagger and hands it to Ned, hilt first. Again, this is a fantastic chapter. It's really Ned's downfall. It's Robert's death. It's the moment. It's not the exact moment where everything changes in the story, but it's right there, right? Robert's death is huge. It has ripple effects all throughout the story. How does that affect her, like Dany, right? This person that took the throne from her family. It's a great moment. It's a great chapter. And it builds up the first book so well. But I want to talk about the point of Ned with Littlefinger here. It's like, Ned doesn't have an option, right? So many people think, why did Ned just trust Littlefinger? He doesn't. Ned has no other option. Think about how much Ned is pushing away from having to say the words that Littlefinger is saying. it's because he has no other option. The options for Ned right now, there's about 3 options that I can really think of. One of them is already screwed because he denies Renly. That was the first option he could have done. He could have done that and made all that work. The second option was he flees now. If he does what Renly does, that's an option. The third option is he gets the gold cloaks from Littlefinger and just prays that that flip of the coin goes towards Ned. Those are his options. And all 3 of them go against his morals, even the one where he runs away. That's not who Ned is. Ned's a soldier. And so all 3 of those go against Ned's code. It's a tough position that you're put in. There is no winning situation for Ned in this chapter. And that's what I think is so interesting, is when George puts our characters in very uncomfortable places where they have to make decisions that maybe they don't even like or are affecting other people. Think about one thing about Dany and Meereen that I know it's not the most loved thing by the fan base, but think about the way Dany is put into this spot where she has to make tough decisions. Her dragons are starting to kill people, you know, kids. What is she going to do about that? You know, she chains up her dragons. It's not something she wants to do, but it's something she almost feels like she has to do. She's trying to go into Meereen's culture, even though she doesn't really want to, but she feels like she has to. There's a great writing here, and I love what George does with this chapter, this character. It's one of the best written of the first book and of the entire story. But thank you guys all for watching. Excited to keep moving forward, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.